All right, it's time to talk some Big Ten football. Week 3 in college football is this weekend, and my special guest is Dustin Hockensmith from PennLive.com as we are going to talk some Penn State football. Dustin, thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me back.
So, we were going to schedule this before the season began, and then things just didn't work out the way that we wanted to. And we said, you know what? Instead of doing it prior, like the week before, it'd be better to hold off. And instead of doing a complete depth chart outlook, college, as we all know, you can cover them head to toe, but you're really not going to know. It's impossible to know exactly which of these players are going to play and who's going to be in what spot. So now we have a couple of weeks to go on, and maybe this is the better deal. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. It is kind of a blessing in disguise to not project this or that, but you have 2 games worth of information. You have 2 games worth of experience to see what the team's all about, even if one of them was against an FCS team.
Yeah, and look, everybody's playing the FCS game. So I know Penn State fans are wondering what are they doing playing Delaware, but they're all playing these teams. And I know you could
Yeah.
play a good FCS team, and I don't know what the deal is with that. But look, I mean, for Delaware, I guess they got a nice paycheck, and it is in the Valley. So I think it makes sense. I mean, you could play another FCS team from like the South or something, and or maybe another better one. I don't know. I mean, Boston College sure picked a tough one with Holy Cross, but I don't know whether or not you could tell, like when these are scheduled 4 or 5 years in advance, how good these FCS teams are going to be, or you know which programs are going to be the bad ones. So they all play them.
Well, and I'm not mad about that fact either. I mean, it's a business decision, and I think for a team like Penn State, especially now with the 4 game window that you can get with freshmen, if you can circle one game and say, "Hey, I think I can get a bunch of these guys in the game. We can see what they're all about. Give them an opportunity." It'll be a good usage of one of those 4 games while we preserve their red shirt. And that's exactly how this one played out. And the other thing I would say is that just because you schedule an FCS team doesn't mean anything's guaranteed. You still have to be crisp. You still have to execute to get to 63-7. And it was just a couple of years ago that Penn State had Villanova come to town, and they won 38-17. It was flat. It wasn't very memorable. It was more of a fight than anybody would have expected. So I really honestly felt like it was progress for them to bring an FCS team to
Yep.
town and truly dismantle them for 60 consecutive minutes.
Absolutely. That's what it is. It's until you blow out the FCS team, the fans don't say any of that. I remember,
Right.
like you said the same thing. Like, look at Florida State. 2 years ago, they scheduled Jacksonville. They lost at home to Jacksonville. Now they're playing, probably the worst Conference USA team. I believe Southern Miss still on Conference USA, and they just annihilated them. And that's the difference because your team is just better now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just fact is it's you need these games early, like you said, because it gives the young kids as well an opportunity. I think it makes a lot more sense that most of these games are played the first game, but you can't do all of that because if everybody does that, who the heck's going to want to watch those first games? So you do have to first few weeks split them up. But I like it because it gives because starting next year, even if you do have those really tough kickoff games, not going to matter as much because you're going to have 16 teams in the playoffs. So you can lose 2 games and still, you're probably, as long as you're a good team, going to make the playoffs.
And I hope, there are 2 different prongs to it. One, you're still going to have teams making business decisions and, paying to have a team come to town so you can collect all that game day revenue. That's still going to exist. But I hope that with a little bit more grace with that 16 team playoff, that it does change scheduling philosophy a little bit.
Yeah, I hope so. And who knows? Maybe we will also because we were talking the other day about how like some of these rivalries are going to go away. No more civil war between Oregon State. No more Bedlam, Oklahoma State. And so, maybe you get them in bowl matchups now, or maybe you get them in playoff matchups by accident. But yeah, the playoffs are coming next year, and then we're gonna have a whole lot of other changes too. I know that a lot of these programs are really proud to be in the Big Ten, as well as they should be. But do you get this feeling? Because I do, that maybe it takes 5 years, maybe it takes 10 years, but I get the feeling the college football landscape overall is going to have a very similar look that like the NFL. Yeah, you're going to
Yeah.
have like a conference and divisions and something like that. Because that just makes more sense than what they're doing right now.
Yeah, and that was the first thing that came. The NFL was the first thing that came to mind whenever it was announced that the Big Ten was expanding to add USC and UCLA. And my thought was, well, you got to go more in the West now and create just like a West division or something like that in the future, just for scheduling purposes, and not even getting into the Olympic sports and the travel that they have to do and all that. It just seemed to make sense if you're going to grow and expand and add teams from the West, that the West should mostly play each other.
Sure. And then you could have, again, maybe you bring in, who is it? Washington State and is it Oregon State that are both kind of in limbo right now, I believe.
They're both in limbo. Yeah.
So maybe a couple of years
and
you bring them in and that's your West.
You mentioned these rivalries that are going to go away, and it's like it's because they're not going to be in the same division anymore. But also, I don't know how long it's going to take to heal the bad blood that comes with it. Because if you have two teams that are kind of attached at the hip, like a Washington State, or Oregon State, and one gets left behind, then there's some ill will there too. And I don't know how long it's going to take to repair that if they ever want to get that rivalry back together, and if it ever makes good business sense in the future to get that rivalry back together. It might not.
Yeah, it was nice to see Nebraska play Colorado this year, last week, because that was an old-time rivalry, and just remembering Penn State playing Pitt, because that would have been, everybody's wondering, and let me ask you, I mean, how does Penn State, the fans, do they feel like Ohio State or Michigan State? I don't know which. I'm assuming it's Ohio State or Michigan, but which team do they feel, if they had to pick one, would be considered their rival?
It's a tough question because they're not anybody's primary rival, and the Big Ten put them in this position playing for that the Land Grant Trophy with Michigan State, the end of the year, like put them in position where that could be a rivalry. It just never really felt like one. Nah. And then it was like, okay, Maryland and Rutgers are coming into the Big Ten. Maybe there's some potential there. Not really.
They're not good enough yet.
Yeah, and those teams have to win games for that to be a rivalry.
Yeah.
Truly nothing felt in terms of fan buzz and like the pure hatred. Nothing has ever felt like Penn State Pitt has felt. Not Ohio State, not Michigan. Like, because I think deep down, every Penn State fan knows Michigan is Ohio State's rival and vice versa.
Yes.
We can have a nice little thing, which they did with Ohio State, but it's substantial. Like that feeling is substantial when the Big Ten does scheduling for 2024 and 25 and says, yeah, Big Ten, Penn State, you don't have a rival.
Yep. Well, maybe 10 years from now, Pitt will join the Big Ten, and because of that exact reason, they'll give Penn State.
I hope USC too. I hope Penn State USC becomes a thing. It could.
Hey, UCLA. They got UCLA though. That's what
right.
You were saying. That's the thing. Penn State. To me, the obvious one is only going to work until or if Rutgers can start winning. If Schiano could turn the program around, which I think he can, he's still going to take a few more years. He almost did it last time, and now he's got the Big Ten behind him. If he can do that and then beat Penn State 2 out of 5 years, but that's still 10 years away. At least.
It does not feel close.
No, it doesn't. Not yet.
And listen, I appreciate Greg Schiano's ability to maximize what he has, and his ability to create stuff on special teams and to take pride in defense and set that tone and that culture. All that stuff is great, but he's got to have players, and he just doesn't have. He hasn't had the skill guys, and he hasn't even come close to having the quarterback.
No.
Until Rutgers can get any kind of semblance of hope, which I think in this current freshman class, I think they got a 4-star or something like that. So
next year coming in next year.
Yeah.
They did have a kid in this class, but next year's kid, the kid Serace, I think it's AJ Serace. Yeah. They're really excited about him. So
and maybe that can do it. Maybe that can nudge them in the right direction.
But you're absolutely right. That's what's holding him back. He's never had a quarterback. And until he gets that. And speaking of quarterback, so Drew Allar This is the reason why a lot of fans and people even outside of Penn State believe that if Penn State's going to be a national championship contender, he's a big reason. Because just like you said, look, the quarterbacks obviously have been a lot better at Penn State, but recently maybe they would have had something a couple of years ago. As you know, the Clifford injury really killed him, and they just didn't get it back. But we know when Penn State does have a dynamic quarterback, that's what puts them usually in that mix with Ohio State and Michigan. Do you think they have that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I thought they had it last year in week one when Drew Aller came into the game in the second half, surprisingly, and just looked like he was rolling out of bed for a scrimmage. I think there's just something about that you can't fake. And so when you have that mentality, in addition to the fact that he does work extremely hard at his craft, and he's been working extremely hard at his craft since he was in like ninth grade. Like the progression for him is no fluke. So when you have that sort of innate poise, which also shows up when he's staring down pressure, when he's making reads, when the play clock's winding down. You see in all these different instances. And then, you combine that with 6'5", 240, and can make every single throw on the field. He legitimately can make every single throw on the field. And he does it with like automatic accuracy, which you don't expect from a big, strong-armed, long quarterback. You do expect, errant throws. You expect that fastball thrower who misses the mark a lot. He doesn't really miss the mark, and he can throw it with touch. I mean, I have been extremely impressed from the jump, and I feel like the fact that Penn State promoted him to number 2 quarterback before training camp broke last year was an incredible sign of how much progress he was making. So I think he has all the tangible tools that you see. He's completed like 78% of his passes through 2 starts. And there were different parts of West Virginia and different parts of Delaware that impressed me about the way that he went about his business. West Virginia was very committed, cover 0, attack, put him under duress and see what he could do. Made a lot of good reads, made a ton of great throws, wasn't flustered by that. And then week 2, Delaware plays this 3-3-5 defense, so they've got DBs everywhere, and they were very committed to not letting anything get behind them. So there wasn't a ton of chunk stuff down the field, nor did Drew Aller force any of that. He took what was there, made a lot of good throws that were right on the mark, and was 22 out of 26. So as much as you can say for a kid who had made 2 starts in his career, he absolutely looks like the real deal.
And I just want to make sure I get it, because I know a lot of people are going to get this wrong, at least initially. So it's Aller.
That is my understanding of it, and James Franklin mispronounces it from my vantage point. So okay. yeah.
All right, good. All right, so Drew Aller it is, and soon enough, people will, if he continues on this trajectory, it's a little one, but it's going to grow. Then I think they'll get it. So, because I'll tell you, we did our preseason show a few weeks ago, and I picked Penn State to win the Big Ten, and the reason and I'm feeling even better now. And the reason I'm feeling better is because with Ohio State, I look at Ohio State, and you know what? They got a young quarterback too, and from what I've seen from his quarterback, he's not Chris Stroud. He's not that type of dynamic kid. He's got. I see what he's got. He's got a strong arm. He's going to be able to sit in a pocket as usual, like those Ohio State quarterbacks. But I think when Ohio State plays the big boys, the kid might have a little bit of trouble. And so far, you never know. It could grow real quick. But that game is coming up next month, October 21st. They get it at home. Are fans kind of feeling that way as well? Are they very optimistic that this is their year?
I think so. I think the optimism still is on the guarded side a little bit, because everybody knows, with no matter what teams James Franklin has had, they're 4-14 against Michigan and Ohio State. That record, until that record changes from a national level and even from within a good chunk of the fan base, there's going to remain some skepticism that this really is the year. And I think it's going to be one of those situations where they're not going to know it's the year until it is the year.
True.
I don't think anybody's really saying they're going to go on the road and beat Ohio State. They're not taking any of that for granted. If ever there was a team for James Franklin to do it, this is the team.
Yeah.
There's a lot of explosive guys at a lot of important spots in the field. cornerback, edge rusher, quarterback, running back. The wide receivers have been really, really good. It's been one of the question marks of the team. Linebacker, they have some great players, including Abdul Carter, who was a freshman All-American, Curtis Jacobs, who's going to be an NFL guy. So they've got, at left tackle, Olu Fashanu is there, who's going to be a first-round pick. I mean, all the key spots on the field, they've got a big-time talent there. And then if Drew, and that was even before seeing anything from Drew Aller. So now you think, okay, if Drew Aller is this guy for 12 games, I mean, this is a championship caliber team, but they have to shed all that baggage. They have to go into the fourth quarter leading Ohio State and still beat Ohio State. Penn State fans have seen that play out before. They know that it takes more than skill and talent in some of those situations, a certain level of fortitude or concentration or somebody who is going to step up and make a big play. And almost all the time, that's been Ohio State. So you still have to change that dynamic. Sure. You're still going to be in a dogfight with Ohio State.
Yep.
So now somebody's got to emerge and step up and make that big play happen like they did back in 2016 with that block punt.
Well, it's interesting because look how quickly it can change. Look at Michigan, Ohio State. So Michigan, now it's a completely different scenario of how it changed. But the fact is they stopped the losing streak. And then all of a sudden the next year, you could just tell that all of a sudden it was Ohio State that was feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
And why would you feel pressure after dominating the program for that many years? But these kids didn't dominate for 15 years or how long it was. They've only been there a couple of years or a year. So every individual player is different, as we all know. And that's why Aller, that's the difference. That's what Penn State fans, I'm sure, are hoping is the difference, is that he's going to be the difference. Because even if some of the other guys might not be so sure, if he's sure and if he plays to his utmost ability, then chances are they're going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, for sure. And, the dynamic that just gets me all the time, and it's the dynamic that has shaken up that Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, is that Michigan is zagging when everybody else is zigging. And if you get caught in a situation where you're playing Michigan's game, that is tough to break yourself out of.
Yeah.
And so Ohio State, and to a point, that's good for everybody. If Ohio State is doubting themselves, and if people are grumbling about Ryan Day and they're grumbling about the quarterback's performance and everything is being discussed in this lens of a little bit more pessimism than optimism, that's probably good for everybody in the Big Ten. But it's just Michigan is just such a different matchup than anybody else in the league. If you want to compete with Ohio State, Penn State's doing exactly the right stuff to do it. The best you can. If you want to compete against Michigan, all right, now you got to say, okay, we got to buckle our chin straps. We got to be able to play physical. We got to get punched in the mouth and keep coming back. It's so imperative, I think, in those games to score early and try to get Michigan out of their routine. But now you got JJ McCarthy, who completed almost 90% of his passes last week. Michigan is a tough cookie to crack, both in terms of talent level because they recruited a little bit better than Penn State, and in terms of their connection with their identity is stronger than probably anybody else in the country. They know who they are. They know what they do. They practice it with that in mind all the time. And then in the games, they're tougher than you because they've been working at that for years and the whole build up to the season.
And it's incredible that it took that long of a period of time for Harbaugh to realize it. It's like he tried to play the game of, well, the game's changing, so I got to change with it. I got to have an aggressive defensive coordinator, and I have to have an aggressive spread offense. And it didn't work. It was terrible. Everybody saw it, and it almost cost him his job. And at the last minute, he sat in that office with maybe he was going to get fired. Who knows? And he was able to talk the AD into, hey, I'm going back to basics. I'm going to do what I've always done, which has always been successful for me. And as soon as he did that, they've taken off. And so that's why they're dangerous again.
It's philosophy. It's recruiting to that philosophy. It's developing to that philosophy. It's getting a bunch of guys with a bully mindset in the trenches to set that tone on both sides. And yeah, I think there's probably not a human being on the planet I understand less than I understand Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah.
But clearly, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very impressed with having his back against the wall on a personal level and being tasked with making not radical changes, because I think he would have loved to just be this guy
Yeah.
all along.
Yeah.
He just wasn't confident that it worked. But I think, like he just found the wherewithal to just say, you know what, I'm going to do what I believe is best for us,
Yep.
even if it's what nobody else in college football is doing. And so I love that dynamic of it. I respect what Michigan has done tremendously.
So that matchup coming a little bit later in the year, November 11th, and that's a home game. So Penn State does, and that's usually the case, right? Every year they split home and away with Ohio State,
Yeah.
Michigan, so they don't get both of them on one look, So it's usually split. Okay.
Yeah, it's not all an all or nothing deal.
Which
Yeah,
is smart.
Which I think is fortunate.
Yeah. Okay, so couple of things. First, since we didn't have you on to go over the depth chart, what I do want to ask you about is just quickly, because you mentioned some of these guys. So let's go over the blue chip guys. Singleton, everybody's high on Singleton. A little bit slow out of the gate so far, but it's a game basically. Nobody cares about what happened last week. So, and then this kid Allen has actually outstatted him at this point in time. But Singleton, everybody really excited about what potential he has. And following the program as long as you've had and all the great running backs that they've had, how does he compare?
He's up there. Like, I think outside of maybe Saquon, probably the best combination of talent, work, production, explosiveness, strength, speed. Like, nobody can really match up with what Barkley brought to the table.
Yeah, that's special.
But Nick Singleton was a 5-star guy, and he's made huge strides in the weight room. He also made huge strides midway and at the end of last year in terms of him as a pure runner. There was a lot of bounce it outside, swing for the fences, get nothing kind of runs for him early last year. And now there's not so much of that. Like, he's made big adjustments with Jay Side of the running backs coach to be more consistent and know what's ahead of him and read what's ahead of him and not worry about busting a 60-yarder, but take what's there. And I think that's a good way to summarize what he's done through 2 weeks. The same reason that Delaware was tough to break anything in the passing game down the field, they had 5 DBs running around in the running game too. So there was a kind of a cap in terms of how likely you were to get a big play on the ground.
Okay.
But he just grinded out yardage. That's Katron Allen's MO. I don't think he had a 20-yard run last year, or maybe it was like 1 or 2 of them. Big plays are not his thing, but he is really good inside that tackle box. Slippery, elusive, and at 225, able to run you over. So that combination is great. Nick Singleton is still the big play threat, and I think you'll absolutely see that going forward.
Yes.
He's probably likely to get maybe not outstatted from a yardage or touchdown standpoint, but he will get outstatted in terms of his carries. Like, I think Katron Allen is going to out carry him, but Singleton, I think you'll start to see some big plays coming from him soon.
Yeah. I think we're all expecting that, and maybe it starts this week. We're going to get into that game in just a minute, and then you look at the wideout situation. So far statistically, you got 10 receptions apiece from Lambert Smith and Wallace III, but Lambert Smith has been the big play guy. He's almost at 20 of reception. You said that this was a bit of an issue, or a question, I should say, before the season began. So combine the question to what you see so far.
I think I had big questions about Keandre Lambert's ability to jump into that number 1 role.
Okay.
And to me, again, like, as much as you can against 2 teams that were sort of outmatched by Penn State, he looks the part. He looks dynamic. He looks like he's taken ownership of that role of being the guy. His big play potential is 100% for real. Harrison Wallace has been really good, more like underneath type stuff. And then they run, probably a legitimate 7 or 8 deep with wide receivers who do all kinds of different things well.
Okay.
Malik McClain, who came from Florida State, I've been pretty impressed by him too, because at 6'4", like 210, he moves extremely well. And so that's a little bit of a difference with some of the other guys. Liam Clifford is Sean Clifford's brother. He's a pretty good little slot grinder. Omari Evans, who you see as a backup to Wallace there at the X spot, has a lot of speed that you'll start to see come to life. Caden Saunders has been compared to KJ Hamler for his quickness and things like that. So when you had, and Dante Cephas come from Kent State, you've seen some flashes from him. He's been a little slow to acclimate himself, but that's that group went from having questions about who's number one, who's number two, and like, okay, you have all these different guys who have never really proven anything. But now it's like, if you've got a quarterback who's really good at pulling the strings, delivers with accuracy, knows where the open guy is, can get it to him in a position to do some damage. Now it's like, okay, having 7 or 8 different wide receivers in addition to those tight ends is kind of a big strength, because you're going to have an advantage or two across the field. And with Drew Aller, again, being able to recognize where those are, Penn State running deep at wide receiver is actually, I think it's actually kind of a good thing here.
I've just posted up the RLS depth chart, the current one that we have of Penn State. So, by the way, so you would say then that Lambert Smith is the clear top dog as far as he's the guy with the highest ceiling.
Well, Wallace has a high ceiling too. Okay. Wallace, he's a tremendous, like they talk about playing basketball on a football field or whatever. We haven't really seen that through 2 weeks yet.
Okay.
But he's got that in him, and still he's just in his second year playing. So he's got more time than Keandre Lambert Smith. But right here, right now, Lambert Smith is a pretty electric playmaker. Not a huge guy, but he just knows, he just has a penchant for making plays. So he's been their top guy. Wallace has a high ceiling, and some of these other guys too. And it's a good mix of players.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know what he actually is, but I think I saw somewhere where he's 6'1", like 185 or something like that. So if there's anything close to that, he's got to gain a little bit of more weight or muscle or something, because that to be that tall and only be 185, he's got to maybe put another 10 or 15 pounds on that frame.
Probably, but it's like you look at the NFL level and you look at guys like Odell Beckham and Deshaun Jackson when he was kind of in his prime, and a bunch of other guys who are not big.
Sure.
You can get that in today's day and age with the way defensive backs play. It's not imperative to be 6'3", 220 anymore. No, and it's borderline a disadvantage now.
Yeah, I mean, it does. The one thing it does do is it just helps you keep you healthier. That's the one thing it can do.
Yeah.
To avoid because you're going to get hit, as we all know, in the NFL. So it's just, but anyway, those are good points, and we'll find out, of course, how he can perform the rest of the season and how this unit can perform, because Cephas is the guy that seems to be the one that has maybe the most hidden potential based, and it's not even hidden. It's just that coming from the MAC, you never know, step up in competition, but it is only a couple of games. So it wouldn't surprise anybody to see him take off at some point.
And I think statistically, like if you look beyond Harrison Wallace and Keandre Lambert Smith, there's a bunch of guys who are in the same neighborhood of numbers. Liam Clifford, Malik McClain had a really nice week 1, quiet last week. And then Dante Cephas, I think, has probably like 4 catches through 2 games.
Okay.
So there's still, like, in terms of putting a label on who's the number 3 or who's the third best option,
too early, yeah.
I don't think we have an answer to that yet.
Yeah.
And it might depend from one drive and one game to the next.
Yep. And then tight end. So Tyler Warren, right, I believe, is the statistical leader at this point. Is he the number 1 tight end?
Man, he's played that part, and it's not really what I or a lot of people would have expected, because Theo Johnson is such a good talent. He is an NFL talent at 6'5", 250. He's a seam stretcher. Hasn't been used like that yet, but he certainly will be. It seems like through 2 weeks that Drew Aller has just made a better connection with Tyler Warren. And Tyler Warren, I think, is a little bit better at the grinding part of the tight end position, the doing the work underneath, the targets that are 10 or 15 yards down the field and not 25. So I feel like he is the preferred option there, but it could get flipped on its ear, because Theo Johnson, he couldn't stay healthy last season, but when he he had that dynamic of being able to get down the middle of the field and make big plays in the passing game.
Okay.
So they're different. I mean, it could be a 1A, 1B situation, but I would put Tyler Warren at this point at 1A.
Okay.
Theo Johnson's the team captain.
But Theo Johnson has it sounds like you're saying he has the biggest upside.
I mean, I would say so, but when you're like Brenton Strange went in the second round last year of the draft.
That surprised everybody, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, but Jacksonville really loves him now too. But I think the thing about that was Brenton Strange, and just like Theo Johnson's this way too, but Tyler Warren probably more so. The dual responsibility of playing tight end.
Yep.
The impact blocker component of it. So with that in mind and the value that presents, Tyler Warren could end up being favored in that scenario. I'm not sure.
Understood.
And
yeah.
all this, I mean, Tyler Warren's a high school quarterback who's doing this now.
Okay, the offensive line. And how's that working out? Because the left tackle, he's the one that everybody's keeping an eye on. Is there someone else, or how's the offensive line in general compared to some of their other really good lines?
Well, the development that happened right before the season, it was at left guard, where a kid by the name of Landon Tengwall, who was their starter at left guard last year, was injured last year. I think it was his shoulder that he hurt. He medically retired. They announced it about a week before the season.
Okay.
So that put JB Nelson, who was a junior college guy. He's from Pennsylvania originally. Played at Lackawanna Community College, which is also where Jaquan Brisker came from and Jair Brown came from. It's been a pretty good pipeline for Penn State. JB Nelson got a lot of praise and a lot of hype in training camp. I think probably because they knew that Tengwall might be a little iffy for the year.
Okay.
But the reputation that he has is the most physical, the most nasty offensive lineman they've got. And I think it was Jeff Schwartz from week 1 posted this video where JB Nelson got 2 pancakes on one play.
Okay.
He planted his guy at the line of scrimmage and then got downfield and planted a linebacker. So I think that's one position to watch. Right tackle, Caden Wallace has been a long-time starter there, but there's still been some consistency issues this year. Okay. He's a big, wide body. He had some struggles last year. They love him. They haven't made a move. But Drew Shelton is the backup there, and he was the guy who came in for Olu Fashanu when he was hurt last year and played really, really well. And he was a true freshman who burned his red shirt as a result of that.
Okay.
So there could be some changes. And then another backup that provides some excellent depth is Vega Ioane, who you see him at left guard behind JB Nelson. Okay. He started at left guard this past week when JB Nelson was a little dinged up. So I think collectively, I think they've got obviously the bright talent in Olu Fashanu. They've got experience like Hunter Norzad at center. And then they've got, 3 for sure legitimate backup types who make this a group that will maintain continuity when injuries kind of inevitably present themselves.
All right. And on the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of talent here, and you've already talked about some of them. So let's start in the front 7. So again, Curtis Jacobs, is he the leader of the defense?
I think you could probably say that.
Okay.
You have like Adisa Isaac is a captain at defensive end.
Okay.
But Curtis Jacobs, with so much experience there and having his hands in playing in the tackle box and playing coverage and understanding what they're doing, Curtis Jacobs is probably the guy who's the most knowledgeable out there. And you've seen, that group of linebackers there is really good. You saw last week the only blemish on the resume against Delaware was a 66-yard touchdown run where they just kind of broke down up front. And one of the guys that kind of gets singled out there is Tyler Elsdon, who's kind of like he's sort of like a co-starter at middle linebacker. He was in the wrong spot, and that was, probably the 3rd or 4th time we've seen him in the wrong spot. So you might see a little bit of change in how that 2 deep works at linebacker, but they're really good there and disruptive too. With Abdul Carter being able to rush the passer, get in the backfield, drop into coverage, just make impact plays.
And then you also up front, you got Robinson, because actually if you take a look at the starters, you mentioned Isaac as a captain. Who are the who are the guys that have the biggest upside, the guys that have NFL potential?
Well, I mean, Chop Robinson has first round potential, and it could be as early as this spring. He had a fantastic first year coming from Maryland, and he looks like he's in position to be even better. You know, he does a lot of things that maybe aren't showing up in box scores necessarily, where he's affecting the quarterback, he's affecting plays, he's making runners cut up field before they're ready to. Like, he's just, not only is he very explosive and twitchy and can bend the edge and do all the things that the NFL wants in a defensive end, he's also very heady and he seems to be in the right spot a lot. So it's a really good combination there.
Okay.
And then Denai Dennis Sutton, 33 there at defensive end, is incredibly explosive. He's not technically a starter, but you're going to see him playing starter reps. And I think you're going to see him on more than one occasion in these big games come up with a splash play, get in the backfield, make a sack. He's another guy that with at least a good year of production and film, he could be a first round pick too. Like, he's that level of talent.
Okay. And then what about Isaac? I mean, is Isaac more of like the solid all around guy? Is that what gives him that leader kind of label?
He's not without talent though. Like, yeah. I think that's the thing. Like, he gets overshadowed a little bit because Chop Robinson is a freak and Denai Dennis Sutton is a freak. I don't think he's in that freak category necessarily, but I do feel like Adisa Isaac is going to run a great 40 time and he's going to do some impressive things like at the combine. And you're going to be like, whoa, we didn't talk about him enough. Like, I think that's in his future. Like, he's just a little overshadowed, but he is a talented guy and a productive guy. He missed the season 2 years ago. So last year was his first full healthy year back. And I think there are expectations that he's going to build off that this year.
Okay. And what about inside in the interior? Is he considered the top guy?
He is probably, and I don't even, maybe not even, like, he's the highest upside guy.
Okay.
He's a guy, he came out of Florida. He was a 4-star. They loved him immediately. He played as a true freshman, which is really uncommon at defensive tackle anywhere, but especially at Penn State. The thing with him is he is undersized. You know, he's 6'1". Okay. He's about he's probably around 285-ish now. I don't know exactly where he's listed, but he's incredibly explosive. He's a penetrating kind of guy. And the two guys you have listed there, Hakeem Beamon next to him, he's the same profile.
Okay.
Was like last year played at like 260, and now he's in the 280s somewhere. Okay. They're both penetrating, explosive, quick guys, but I just have questions about that specifically for the Michigan matchup. Maybe this weekend against Illinois, they're struggling a little bit, but last time we saw Penn State play Illinois, they just ran, and I don't expect anything different from them.
All right, and then in the back, the secondary is King. Is he the top guy back there?
Yeah, and he's got first round buzz too. I think, you look back at last year, depending on where you look. Like, if you look at Pro Football Focus, for example, Kalen King was a better performer than Joey Porter Jr. was last year.
Okay.
He is very sticky in coverage, mirrors opposing wide receivers extremely well, very competitive, great when the ball's in the air, all the stuff that you want in a cornerback. It looks like, barring anything unforeseen, he's probably exiting after this year, and he's probably going to be in that first round mix, just like Joey Porter Jr. was. Joey fell to the second round, but I would expect Kalen King, if he plays like I think he's going to play all year, he's going to be a first rounder.
And is there anyone else in that secondary that has a high upside?
I love personally the true freshman safety, King Mack. He's a Florida State track champion. He is a little bit on the small side, like 5'9", maybe 185. Like, he's not a huge guy.
Okay.
We saw him last week come from the third level of the defense on a blitz, a safety blitz. Came from way deep and just lambasted the Delaware quarterback. Like, that's the speed that shows up.
Okay.
Doesn't have a big role just yet, but I think KJ Winston is a true sophomore, as a first-time starter at safety. I think you have 4 really solid guys there at safety. The question is, like, Jair Brown was so good at making plays. Jaquan Brisker was so good at making plays. The thing that this defense lost is that playmaking safety.
Okay.
They don't really have one of those. The KJ Winston and Keaton Ellis combined to force and recover a fumble last week, which was great. Zachy Wheatley, who's there, who gets a bunch of reps, is a really good guy when the ball's in the air. But they don't have one of those disruptive guys. And so that's the new personality of the defense.
Okay. Well, that's something definitely keep an eye on then. Uh, let's talk about the game. And as you mentioned last year, that was really the first game that people, uh, when Illinois um, showed everybody that they were just a different team. Belima, I think, is an underrated coach. He didn't fare well in the SEC. I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
But they are just going to do, again, sort of like what Harbaugh is doing at Michigan, and that's just, we're just going to come after you. And maybe they don't have uh, the top recruits that Michigan does, but you saw last year Illinois gave Michigan fits in Michigan. That was a
Yeah.
close football game. That game went down to the wire.
Yeah.
So this, even you're right that they're struggling a little bit to start the season, even though Toledo, best team from the MAC, so you can't really say much there, even though they lost a total yards battle. I expected them to lose the Kansas game, to tell you the truth, because I think
Right.
people were disrespecting Kansas a little bit. Kansas is
Yeah.
an up and coming team. They showed it last year. But because the thing with Illinois is breaking in a new quarterback and their star running back's gone, and that's not easy to replace. So, from what you've
Yeah.
seen so far from Illinois, what do you think I mean, what do you think as far as the matchups overall?
So going back 2 years ago, Illinois beat Penn State in 9 overtimes, and
Yeah, that was
they made
crazy.
the
That was an
yeah
ugly nine
it was
overtimes.
it was a crazy ugly.
Yeah,
It was like like free. You can never complain about free football unless it's that game. That's how I felt about it. But in that game, Illinois really did a good job of putting. They had 7 offensive linemen in the game. Like
yeah,
everybody in the stadium knew what they were going to do, and
yep,
they were able
yep,
to do it anyway.
yes,
But even with that in mind, Illinois having that level of success on the ground, if Penn State's offense wasn't a mess, Penn State still wins that game. So let's just say for a second that Illinois is able to recreate that success. I don't think they're going to be, because their team personality is different. They're still finding their way. I think Penn State's offense is much, much better now,
yeah,
it's multi-dimensional. You can't really take away the running game, because Drew Aller has shown that he's fully capable of beating you. And if you do take Drew Aller away and make him work, then you got the two running backs who can do whatever. So I think Penn State is a much better team, and I think they've performed much better to this point. And I actually like Penn State to cover the spread in this game, which is around, I think, 14 and a half.
yeah. Actually, I haven't even seen it yet. I was going over it before, but if it is 14 and a half, I would agree. I think that the only thing is it's an Illinois home game, but Illinois, Penn State, I just said it. If they're going to be the Big Ten champs, and we know they have the capability of doing that, then this is that type of game early in the season. They need to send some sort of a statement, even to themselves, that this isn't going to be like a couple years ago. And we're gonna now look. There's always going to be that game that you're a huge favorite, double digit favorite. You're supposed to win, and it goes down to the wire. Maybe this is that game. Who knows? But
Yeah.
if you throw that out, I agree. I think if it's 14 points, I think Penn State's definitely a better team than Illinois regarding the spread itself. But at least it's a good test to go on the road for the first time. Is this Aller's? This is his first road start, right?
It'll be his first road start. His first ever appearance was on the road at night, week 1 at Purdue last year, and he looked pretty good doing it. So I don't think he's going to be affected by that. And I think last week to me was confirmation of Penn State's business-like approach to everything. Like, I feel like they've been very business-like and operating like professionals almost to this point. I feel like they're well equipped to handle. It's going to be, I think, an 11 a.m. local start in
Okay.
Champaign.
Okay.
So you're gonna wrap up your brunch and go right to the stadium and whatever. So there's a unique component to that too, of getting off to an early start. Probably a stadium at 11 o'clock in the morning that isn't full or loud. So you're gonna have to deal kind of with that. So I think there's some unique tests to it. And I think Illinois, why would you not go back to the thing that worked so well 2 years ago? Try that out. Penn State still has a similar vulnerability, I think, that they had in that game. So I expect Illinois to kind of go that route. They've got a dual threat quarterback, which can kind of create fits. for any defense, but
Yeah,
I just feel like the most explosive athletes on the field, probably the 8 or 9 most explosive athletes on the field are all on Penn State side.
yes,
So, Illinois is going to have to do a lot of things right to be in contention for this game. Especially, I think, there's enough players left on Penn State's roster from 2 years ago that they're going to remember how that felt 2 years ago.
absolutely. Yes. And the one thing you mentioned Altmaier as far as a dual threat, uh, and he's an upgrade because Illinois did not have good quarterback play last year. It was better. DeVito was better than what they had, so I'm not going to say that. But Altmaier
Right.
gives him a little bit something else overall. But still, he's not he's not Aller. He's just not. So that's still a huge advantage for Penn State. And the thing though that I think is the biggest loss is just not having Chase Brown back there. It's just a big difference.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
Reggie Love is just
Power
okay.
back.
Love is a
Big.
fine running back, but he's not Chase Brown.
Yeah, and having that big dynamic back, you talk about if you're committed to it in Illinois, like I don't know what their drives were like in those games, but they felt like they were like 25 plays for
Yeah.
72 yards. They were very willing to go 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards, 1 yard, and just keep going and going and going. Chase Brown was automatic. If that's what you're looking for, Chase Brown's automatic.
Yes.
So if they're going to go that route, they better be automatic because at some point Penn State's going to disrupt that schedule and they're going to put them in a bad situation and make them make a play in a way that they're not comfortable making it.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of things that's good about Illinois bringing back talent because they do have talent coming back. It's just that when you eliminate the quarterback and it's a new guy, it may take him a little bit, and he's going to be playing even though it's home. I mean, this is just a monster game for this kid, and he's never been in this type of situation before. And the toughest situation he was in didn't fare all that great last week. And Kansas is not Penn State, no matter how much we want to talk Kansas up. They also had a lot of big losses in the defensive backfield. That's really a spot that Penn State should be able to take advantage of. So, and you would think that Illinois, we've got to try to stop the run. Everybody's probably going to feel that way. So maybe we could expect Penn State to try and open it up a little bit and maybe pass to open up the running game, something like that.
Yeah, and I think they're capable of doing that. I'll be interested to see, like the dynamic that Drew Aller brings is that if you're given any cushion whatsoever, he's delivering the ball on time with a lot of velocity on it, and it's hard. It's really hard to defend. So what do you do with that? And I don't know really the personality of Illinois' new defensive coordinator and what they're going to be trying to do, but they might see a defense that's more likely to say press and not give up, not give any cushion, not give any yards like that. And if that's the case, then I do think you'll see Penn State taking some swings over the top.
That is a good point because that's another part of Illinois that they have changing. And so far, it hasn't worked, the defense. So you're changing schemes a little bit, and then you've got just an all new guy back there. And the guy that was there is now a head coach. That shows you how qualified he was.
Right.
So Penn State should be able to take advantage of that. And like you said, because let's remember, the game Illinois Penn State 2 years ago was the first game after the injury to Clifford. So he gets hurt in the Iowa game, and we all know what happened in that game. It looked like Penn State was going to win that game, and he gets injured, and there's just next game, and then that Illinois game
that inspired a new philosophy on managing quarterbacks for Penn State. It was such a mess. And they had that was Mike Yurcich's first year, I believe. So they focused all the reps on Clifford and had no safety net whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
And they made that choice. Yeah. They made that choice. And so now I think they were committed last year. We're not going to be in that position again. They're committed through 2 weeks. We're not going to be in that position again. So that changed Penn State, probably for the better.
Absolutely. And you can't do that. I mean, I see it happening still with some teams that just, why aren't you playing the backup? It's 40-0 in the fourth quarter. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And sometimes it takes, like what happened in that scenario 2 years ago, to get the wake-up call. It shouldn't, but sometimes it does. So
Yeah, and I don't know, like I can't put myself in the shoes of a coach, but most coaches never feel comfortable. Yeah, 40-0 in the third quarter. You know, they're
yeah,
afraid of momentum swinging back the other way, and they're going to score 6 touchdowns. Bang, 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 bang,
yeah,
bang.
I know.
That's the way that they think, and that's the way they're
Yeah.
programmed to think. But for everybody else in the stadium, it's just like, why
Why are you
not?
doing that? Yeah. And it's not
Yeah,
just the quarterback. It's other. It's like I was even watching last night. It was the fourth quarter of the game with the Cowboys and the Giants. It's what was it, 40-30 something to nothing, and it's like
yeah.
Prescott's out there, Pollard's out there. It's like, what are you doing? The game
I
is
don't know.
over. What if one of
I
these guys
don't
gets
know.
hurt? It's just
Yeah, I'm not sure what they think, but I think in Penn State's case anyway, 2 years ago with Taquan Roberson, there was pretty close to zero confidence in him,
yeah,
which is why that you didn't see him earlier, and which is why he struggled so badly against Iowa, and then there was never going to be any confidence after that. So now last year there was a lot of confidence in Drew Aller.
yes,
This year, there's a lot of confidence in the backup they have, Bo Provola, who's a redshirt freshman. There's a lot of confidence in him, too.
okay,
When you have confidence in the backup, you have confidence to play him in these situations. It's
true,
like a catch-22.
yeah, and that's all also a part of recruiting because when you're Penn State, you really, I mean, you should have a qualified number two. If you don't, then something's gone wrong with your recruiting. And look, if there's an injury, fine, but if
Yeah.
you haven't recruited at least two, let alone me, and even in the transfer days, you should have a qualified number two if you're Penn State. And I'm sure that
Often,
probably shouldn't happen again.
you're chasing your own tail often, though.
Yeah.
Like Penn State has not landed a veteran quarterback in the transfer portal,
Oh,
but they've
okay.
lost a bunch.
Wow.
They're zero and whatever in the transfer portal, and they weren't ever guys who were gonna be contributors, but they would have been candidates at this point to be backup
Yes.
quarterbacks.
It's sort of like what Michigan did the last few years with Bauman. That kid had
Yeah,
nice numbers at Texas Tech, had no idea what he was doing at Michigan as a number three guy behind McNamara and McCarthy. And he didn't do anything, never really played, but that's what he was there for. Like in an emergency
yeah,
situation, we've got a guy that if something happens to the top two, we can go to him. And that's the best thing for a program like Penn State to use the transfer portal for in that situation is to bring in a veteran quarterback that maybe knows he's not going to start anywhere. But hey, you know what? Come here and be the backup. And if something happens to our starter, you've got some experience. You've been around a few years. You might be able to help us out. So
yeah. It ends. I think it's ultimately a tough sell. Like that position, why are guys most often transferring?
yeah,
You know,
sure.
they're. I don't think they're leaving one place for another to get a better backup job. In
Usually
most
not.
cases.
Yeah,
Yeah.
usually not.
So, I think it helps like the offensive coordinator, if he is good at developing quarterbacks and good at identifying quarterbacks that fit what they do, then maybe game experience isn't the end all be all. Like
Yeah.
Penn State had a sophomore first time starter in Drew Aller. They had a redshirt freshman in Bo Probola who had never played a snap. And they have a true freshman, Jackson Smolik, who has obviously had never played a snap before last week. So that's like on paper, that's scary, but I don't think they felt that scared about it.
One more note, and that is, and I'm going to throw a handicapping tip in here because we do a college football show on Thursdays with Mark Lawrence, who's a big time handicapper, long time handicapper. So from his media guide, and I'll always bring these up when we do games. So the only thing I was able to find in this game that could come into play is Illinois has covered 6 straight games at home when taking on opponents with an 800 or better winning percentage.
Hmm.
So they rally for the big games at home when they're a heavy dog in these situations, and we'll find out whether or not they could do it again. But I don't look at this when I say I think they should cover. I don't look at this as Penn State's going to score early and often, and they're going to win, 50-14. I think what probably happens is they just eventually out talent them by late in the game, and by the third and the fourth quarter, they're able to win by more than 14 points because they're just better.
And I do think there are multiple pathways to get to covering. There are pathways where Penn State scores early or they stretch a big lead and Illinois has to play catch up, which is not where they want to be. There's a
Yes.
scenario where it's kind of tight, but Penn State makes some big plays in the second half. So there's a scenario where Penn State dominates on the ground. There's a scenario where Penn State dominates through the air. So I think there are multiple pathways to getting there. And I think the pick that I made early was 34-13. Not killing the
Yeah, there you
spread,
go.
but not
I
killing
like
the
it.
spread, but substantially covering it.
Yeah,
That's the way that I see it.
I like it. And I enjoyed this conversation, Dustin. I know we weren't anticipating a long interview, but we get going and we just like talking. And
I think we fixed a lot of the world's problems while we were at it too.
yeah, we did kind of go off Penn State early in the broadcast, but I hope everybody enjoyed it. And we can, again, if you're a Penn State fan, check out PennLive.com, and you could also and I have your Twitter account on the ticker as well, and I will have links to the description. I mean, in the description area for both your articles as well as your Twitter account, so everybody can check that out. Do you have a show that you do, Dustin, or do you just do interviews like this?
I do. So I have a podcast that I do once a week on Penn Live, and I do
Okay,
a radio show that airs at State College and a few other places called the Keystone Sports Network, where we, in season, we're going to review all the games. So the most that aired on Monday, we talked about Delaware. We'll do the same thing this Monday, Penn State, Illinois.
excellent. I'll put some links in the description area for those as well, and I look forward to it, especially if I believe the meeting of Penn State and Ohio State will come together of two unbeatens, and I do think Ohio State plays Notre Dame before they play
I think
Penn
you're
State.
right.
So you never know. Maybe Ohio State will be playing a game for their lives in that one if they are unable to beat Notre Dame, which could happen. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh
That's going to
yeah.
be a tough one. But would this be considered the toughest game between now and then for Penn State?
I think next week they got Iowa at home in the
Oh,
whiteout, so that'll be.
there
And
you
boy,
go.
Penn State, I'm sure
That's a
is
better
looking
one.
forward to trying to beat those guys up if they can.
Yeah, that's a big one. That'll be the big one between now and then. That's going to tell us a
Yeah.
lot, even though they are at home, uh, and uh, and I know Iowa fans are not very happy still about what's going on with their offense. But hopefully,
They're
if
gonna
you're
have to do better. If you're gonna beat a top 10 team on the road, you better score a few points.
yes,
Hey, listen, Taquan Roberson isn't playing quarterback next weekend.
no, Cade McNamara and Drew Aller. That's going to be a nice matchup. But first things first, take care of Illinois. Take care of one team that you want to that you want to put on the checklist at a time. And
Yeah,
yeah, and hopefully, again, if all goes well, either way, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk for that week for the Ohio State week, and I'm looking forward to it. So I appreciate your time, Dustin.
absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the next time.